Okay, so Genesis, we just finished Genesis 35. What we're going to do next is Genesis 36, but then we're going to make a little bit of a deviation and do Genesis 38 after that. So we're going to do 36 and 38. We're going to save Genesis 37 because it's kind of the beginning of Joseph's life, and we kind of wanted to keep it with Genesis 39 onward in his life. So I am doing a little bit of reordering as we're just going through this. Again, the Bible is going to typically, it's going to run through first in Genesis 36, some of Esau's genealogy, how all that works out, some of that narrative, and then it's going to go into Joseph's early life in 37, and then 38 is going to kind of be this like excerpt from Judah's life, and then it's going to go back to Joseph's life. So to just keep things flowing, we're going to do the 36 and 38, so that way we'll save chapter 37 on Joseph's early life to then just go straight into his time in Egypt. But just know in the Bible, it's not this way. The Bible's correct, but it's okay. We're going to jump around a little bit. So just starting back, there were some things that come up in Genesis 36, just with the list here. We're going to get into Esau's genealogy. So as we remember, Cain's genealogy, Ham's genealogy, and now Esau's genealogy, Ishmael's genealogy. They're always discussed, but then that's the end of their story. And so basically they become the other nations outside of the promised land or in that Arab world. So Esau's genealogy will be that. But again, that's kind of what goes on. So we're going to kind of have that closing of Esau's part of the narrative. And then it's going to go back to just focusing on that main promised line, right? Abraham has a lot of narrative chapters. Isaac has a lot of narrative a couple. And then Jacob has a lot. And then Joseph has a lot. And so we just see that there's going to be a lot of narrative that comes out of Jacob's line, so we need to close out the Esau story. So that's really what we're doing here. And if you remember, Isaac has already died. There's been a number of burials that happened to kind of sum up the last section. And so really now it's Jacob and Esau. We're going to finish out Esau, and then we're going to jump fully into Jacob's 12 sons from here on out. So the first thing to notice is Genesis 36 sometimes is used to help us understand when the book of Genesis was finally dated. There's some words and some changes that were made along the way. So Moses wrote the book down, but some of the names and places actually come from more in the time of King David that are being used. So they would kind of go back, it seems possibly, and write in some of the names of the city names or what they were in the more modern times of David's time. So again, there is some questions about dating the book as a whole, just because there seem to be some like things. It talks about, well, there was nothing like this until the time of the kings, and Genesis says that, but Moses couldn't have known about the time of the kings because that was into David's lifetime. So again, there's a few things in Genesis that show that there was probably some later editorial put in and things like that we see come into the book that we currently have in the final form for Genesis. So just to know that, like there are some things here. Remember that though Genesis was written by Moses, this is to be a history lesson for the people of his time period to kind of explain to them where all of these tribes and nations around them are from. Was they're going to go into battle against these people or have to come into treaties or whatever it might be? How are they supposed to relate to them? Who are these people? Where did they come from? And where was their start? And so really knowing Esau's line is important because he's going to continue to come up. They're going to have an ongoing relationship. So Edom and Israel, so Edom being Esau's line, and Israel being Jacob's line, are going to have this interaction in Numbers 20:14, Deuteronomy 23:7, and going forward. They're going to have a lot of mention of the Edomites. And so we just see that is very much part of why this is being written. So Genesis 36, verse 1, it says, "This is the account of the family line of Esau." That is Edom. So that's how we know it's Edom, right? He just tells us. The Edomites are Esau's line. Again, like with Cain and Ishmael, Esau is going to be described, and then we're going to wrap up his story. So Esau took wives from the women of Canaan, and we already knew that, right? And these were the wives that really irritated his mother. And so he takes these wives, and he also takes one of the daughters of Ishmael to irritate his father Isaac. We've already had those narratives, but this is a summary of that. So this is in verse 3 and 4, 2, 3, and 4. So again, it talks about which sons they were bearing to him. And so again, he has many sons that were born to him in the land of Canaan. So Esau is living there with Isaac and Jacob, and he marries 3 women who his parents Isaac and Rebekah did not like. They were Canaanites or Ishmael's line. And that's really what he did. And he did it right under their noses there in Canaan. And this is kind of summarizing that, right? So as we move into verse 6, it says, Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the members of his household, as well as his livestock and all other animals and all other goods he had acquired in Canaan, and moved to the land some distance from his brother Jacob. Their possessions were too great for them to remain together. The land where they were staying could not support them both because of their livestock. So Esau, that is Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. So again, this is very similar to Abraham and Lot parting. Every time there's a parting, because they're being blessed, right? They both have large amounts of stuff. So it's not like Esau not being the promised line doesn't mean that you can't be successful and prosperous. It just means that they don't have the long-term covenant. And so Esau travels southeast to below the Dead Sea. Again, it's east. It's not said explicitly, but we remember Ham travels east, Ishmael travels east. All of them continue to. Again, the promised land is always in the west. That's where Jacob's going to stay. Edom is important, as it will come up in later history. So Moses is writing this with purpose for the people of his time period to understand why they split apart. This wasn't a falling out. There wasn't a well dispute or anything like that. They just were too prosperous. And Esau was the one that left. And remember, in a lot of the stories, when somebody leaves, then the one that was supposed to be blessed usually becomes even more wealthy and blessed. And so again, let's move into verse 9. This is the account of the family of the line of Esau, the father of the Edomites in the hill country of Seir, right? So Moses is saying, that's where these people come from, and this is their father. And then it gives a list of names of his sons. He has a number of sons by his different wives. And again, you can read about their names. There were a few names that stood out. There's a possibility like one of his sons, Reuel, may be the ancestor of the clan from which Moses' father-in-law hailed. So there might be some interconnection here that ends up, Moses might marry somebody from the line of Esau. The book of Job will have some of these names, Eliphaz and Teman, meaning the land of Moab, which is probably the setting of Job's narrative. So the book of Job might be somehow connected with the line of Esau as well. And in this same group, we have Amalek, one of the sons' names, will be a bitter enemy of Israel. It's unknown if it's the same person, but it might well be one of the sons of Esau. So we see the name, right? Reuel, Moab, Amalek. These are all Esau's sons, and they do show up in other books of the Bible. And so again, as we interact with the Bible, we'll be able to point back and go, oh yeah, that was Esau's line that they're intermarrying or having issues with, or whatever might be coming up. And so that's what the whole point of this section is to kind of distinguish who's of Jacob and who's not of Jacob. And so again, there in verse 15, it says, these were the chiefs among Esau's descendants. And so there's a number of chiefs he had from his line. And it talks about the clans that come from him. And so verse 15 through 19 kind of gives you a lot of names. I'm not going to read all these genealogy names. A clan would have been about 1,000 people, possibly, was one guess in one of the commentaries. And that's an informed guess, right? And so again, from each of these chiefs, there was a lot of people. So Esau's line is very prosperous. It's not that just Jacob's line is going to be prosperous, but Esau's is as well. So it lists all these chiefs and it lists these clans. And then it says, there's a section on the Horites in verse 20. These were the sons of Seir, the Horite, who were living in the region. And it just gives a whole list of them. And it says one of them discovered the hot springs in the desert while he was grazing the donkey of his father. And so again, they're kind of explaining where they live out in the desert, that it's important to have springs. And again, Esau's group would dispose the Horites in Deuteronomy 2:12, and Israel would deal with the Canaanites. So these Horites that were in the land, it's kind of giving this idea that there's people that Esau is actually going to end up dealing with, these Horites. And this goes from verse 20 to verse 30. It gives all the chiefs of the Horites. And so Esau has his chiefs, the Horites have theirs. And by Deuteronomy, he's going to dispossess them from this land of Edom. And so that just leaves Israel to deal with the promised land when they come to take the land. So sometimes these other family groups like Esau's are going to handle some of the other issues in their general regional area to bring more like border peace and security. And so again, as we get into this, this is one of those phrases in verse 31. It says, these were the kings who reigned in Edom before any Israelite kings reigned. For the author to know that there had been kings that reigned in Israel and that the Edomites reigned before them means that he's right, that this phrase was put in sometime around the time of David. And it gives this whole list in verse 31 to 39 of the different rulers of Edom. Again, it's going to say there was kings. And so from Esau's line, there are kings that come. Again, Sarah had a promise that from her line there would be kings. And it wasn't just the line of Judah and the Davidic kingship. There was also kings that came out of Esau that ruled in the land of Edom. Again, this is an area next to, more on the east or southeast than the Promised Land. This is interesting, I think, because we see that there are kings, there are clans. We saw this a bit with Ishmael too. He seemed to have a pretty strong and mighty family. And so it doesn't, all of this points to how much God is doing this blessing of these people and that they have these chiefs. And so again, in verse 40 to 42, it's going to give another list of chiefs. And we're going to continue to see this comparison back and forth through this book between Lot got compared to Abraham and Esau compared to Jacob. They choose to go east. So we're kind of have the same thing. And just to kind of sum all this up, in general, Ishmael and Esau are not to remain in Canaan, the Promised Land. They had their own territories to take. They had their own people groups. They could have other lands around there. They became stronger than the people, right? That's kind of what dispossessing an area means. It means to go into something that's sort of inhabited, but not as well as what you're going to set up with your kingship. So that really brings us to the end of Genesis 36. It's a rather short chapter. It's just a conclusion. It more or less is a summary of Esau and his line. You can read all the names if you want, do further study. I looked into some of it, but again, the general consensus is that these are to give the idea for the people at Moses' time, as they run into these clans and things, that they would immediately know who they were. They could look them up, basically, if you were trading and doing other things or traveling somewhere, and know who you're talking to and what line they came from. And so that was a major point. I mean, this is going to be, so Moses is writing about 400 years after. And so they would have some sense still of which clan and which tribes they came from and which people group. And so as they're traveling around, and they're going to be able to understand a little bit more about the world they live in. It's kind of like us when we're kids, right? We take a geography class. We get to know about the other nations. If you go travel somewhere, you're going to know where that people group kind of comes from and a little bit about them. So this is kind of what Moses is doing here. This is their history lesson. So we're going to skip, like I said, Genesis 37 for right now. We'll get back to it. And we'll pick up the story of Joseph when we do. But first, we're going to take this Genesis 38, which is kind of an interruption. It's going to be the story of Judah. And it's kind of interesting how the stories of Joseph and Judah are interwoven. Judah is going to be that son from Leah, and Joseph is that son from Rachel. And again, Jacob really wants the son of Rachel to inherit a lot. He's even going to give him a double portion blessing give it to his sons, and all of this to Joseph. He keeps trying to give Joseph the preeminence, but it keeps turning out that Judah has it. And so there is this story about Judah, because of the promised line, you typically get one good narrative about them, right? And we'll see this come up again with like Ruth and Boaz in that promised line, and Jesse, and then David. And so you kind of have these narratives that go through the whole Bible in this promised line. And we're going to get that here with Judah. And we need this interruption for Judah's story because Joseph ends up not being of the kingly line. It's actually Judah. And Judah's the third born. If you remember, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi were the first three of Leah, but they all get in serious trouble. And remember, it doesn't always go to the oldest child. The promised line typically hasn't been. And so Judah is the fourth, and he's going to be the one. And so something happens. The lineage of this promised line for the actual kinghood and messianic promise of Jesus, so that Jesus was going to come from the line, is seriously threatened in Judah. Judah's sons are a mess, and we'll kind of see how that works out. They actually die. Some of them too much sin. Like there's things going on, And basically by the end of the day, there's a major problem. So this chapter is going to pick up on that. So let's start in Genesis 38, verse 1. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. So Judah's older. He is, I mean, the brothers are now growing up, right? So we've already seen them kind of come to age, and they've buried their grandfather Isaac and everything. So the narrative of Jacob and Esau is closed, and now we're going to jump into Jacob. And it's time to have this continue down his line. So we're going to see that Judah's son Perez is going to be the next in line, down the line towards King David. But how does he get Perez? And so this is kind of a difficult story. Like, it doesn't have a lot of moral learnings from it. We're not sure if anybody does what's right or wrong in this story. We know that some people do more right than others, but doing more right than somebody else isn't necessarily the best either. So in verse 2 it says, there Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son named Onan, and she gave birth to still another son named Shelah. It was Kezib that she gave birth to him. It was at Kezib, sorry, that's the place. So she gives birth to 3 sons. He marries a Canaanite. She has 3 sons. And so how is the line going to carry on? Are they going to come through Canaanite woman at this point or not? And so he now has 3 sons, and we're not quite sure. We're not quite sure how God is going to work through this. So Judah has married a Canaanite. This is not what Abraham and Isaac have done. And this is not what Jacob has done either. They've all gone back to Abraham's homeland and married from that family line. His promise is not actually going to come through this woman, this Canaanite woman. And so Tamar will end up bearing his promised child. Her origin is not given, so we don't know what origin Tamar is. We're not sure if the promised child comes through a Canaanite person or not. She starts as a daughter-in-law, but she ends up carrying his child by her own actions. So Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And that's kind of important. They're going to be kind of part of this story. Judah's in the middle of the promised land at this point. So he's smack right in the middle of where he's supposed to be, because he's supposed to stay in the promised land. So even though he moved away from the family, he still stayed right in the center of the promised land. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So his children, his 3 sons, are growing up. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So we're told that his son has died because he was wicked. So this is not a good thing, right? He has a Canaanite wife, then his first son is wicked. And now we see that the wickedness of and that it's attributed to God's judgment that he dies. We'll actually see that Judah blames Tamar for it. And so he doesn't seem to understand that it was God that did it. So Tamar, in this culture, is now Judah's responsibility. He basically brought her into this family to marry his son. His son is dead. He now needs to carry on the name of his son by giving his oldest son, who's dead, children through his wife. So he would normally, and this is how Leviticus is set up, that wife would then be passed to another one of the brothers for them to father a child in the oldest son's name. Now, this is not a very favorable thing, typically, for a younger son to have to do this, because that means they're losing the inheritance of that firstborn, because the secondborn now would be the one inheriting everything, because their firstborn had died, right? So if your oldest brother dies, then you start inheriting everything. But if he had a wife with no sons yet, because normally it would just go to his sons otherwise, now if you father a son with that woman, which is what Leviticus tells them to do, that son then carries on the family legacy, not the secondborn and his children. So again, it gets a little bit tricky here. And so Tamar is supposed to be taken care of by this family. She's supposed to be taken care of and stay in the family. She can't go back to where she was. She's supposed to stay inside this particular family. So then in verse 8, Judah said to Onan, Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he was supposed to have a child with her, he would make sure that that wasn't possible. You can read verse 9. And what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Basically, he's trying to preserve his inheritance. This is all about money. And so he is trying to keep his family line intact and not his brother's. And so this is why this is wicked in the sight of the Lord. He's trying to basically rip off the way inheritance and family works. And the promise that Tamar had when she came into this family, that she was going to have children to take care of her in her old age and all of those things that come into this society, that the new family bringing her in is supposed to take care of her. And so they are really wronging her here. She's kind of just being passed around, but not able to fulfill what she wanted to be, which was a mother. And so again, Onan now is in trouble with the Lord. So the Lord is going to put him to death as well. So now it's attributed to the Lord that he's judged 2 in a row now, and Onan, for doing wicked things and we don't get the whole story with definitely on, just as he was wicked. So we just have to take for granted whatever that might be. We don't know if it was just full out idolatry, if there was a lot of other things going on. Onan, we get a little bit of his story, but we have to assume there's a possibility he was also into the same wickedness his older brother was. So this may be far deeper than what even the story is telling us. So things aren't going well for Tamar. She's supposed to have a child. Now she's had 2 husbands die. So Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up," for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. So Judah does what's wrong here. He sends Tamar away to go live in her family of origin and wait around until the 3rd son comes of age. Now, she shouldn't have had to leave. Judah was responsible to feed her, to house her, and take care of her, and he wasn't doing that. As the head of this clan or this unit, he had brought her in as family. They had made this, and the agreement to get married was a family involvement, right? Because he, as the father of them, was the one that arranged the marriage. So he was supposed to be taking responsibility, and he doesn't. He sends her away, and he also promises her, "I'll call you up when the third son is ready to get married." But in his heart, he really didn't want his 3rd son to marry her. He basically here flat out accuses her of being the reason that his 2 older sons died. Not their own wickedness. He just thinks it's her as a woman that did this, just by being in their presence. So Tamar is now sent off, and she is considered probably what we would consider a bad person, trying to think like carries a bad element with her because the 2 oldest sons died, and he's scared now for his 3rd son. So she is not taken care of the way she should. And that is one definite comment we can make here. So after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. And so when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. So again, Judah's wife, now who bore these 3 sons, also dies. So there's definitely no way she's having any more children. He grieves for a little bit, and then he goes to meet up with where the sheep are being sheared. So he takes a trip. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep," she took off her widow's clothes. So she was still in widow's clothes because there was nothing she could do in society at this point. She had basically been cast off. Her husband had died, and now she's in waiting for the 3rd son to come of age, and she's wearing widow's clothes this whole time. She covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Selah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. She desperately needs children, and they need to come from Judah's family. And so he is required, since they entered into this marriage covenant, to give her children by one of his sons, and that hasn't happened. So there has been no fulfillment. So at this point, we would say Jacob is not doing her right. He's not righteous, and that's what that means. So he's not doing what's just and right to a widow and taking care of her. Not only has he sent her home, but he's also not providing her children like he was supposed to. So she comes up with this plan. She hears that he's on this trip, and she's just gonna go sit and disguise herself on the side of the road, and basically act like a prostitute to try to get her heir, her son that she needs. So Judah has lost his wife, and he just returns to normal life. And we see that he's allowed to take off his grieving and return to normal life, but Tamar isn't. And so again, she is in a completely stuck position. Judah should have been deeply invested in keeping the promised line going. So let's just also step back and say, Judah had more than just a normal person that he needed to keep a promised line. He only has one son left. We don't have any idea how this son was doing or if he knew that there was a covenant promise on him and the son. But Judah was circumcised. He was part of the covenant family. He should have known that these children were very important. It was a big part of his father's life to know that the multiplication of children was a big part of the blessing. And to only have one living son is kind of not the right direction. We also know that Judah's going to be the promised line of the kingly line. And this is really important to God. And like I said, the book of Genesis, a lot of times we see that sovereignty of God needs to step in sometimes. Like when Sarah gets protected from being in that harem that second time when she's about ready to conceive Isaac. She needs to be with Abraham, not in somebody else's harem. It's the same thing here. God's going to kind of have to, and I'm not saying God stepped in here but God has judged these two first sons of his. We're not going to blame the prostitution on God, but something has to happen. And if people don't do it, then God will have to do something. So, and obviously Judah's not doing what he's supposed to keep the promised line going and not inquiring of the Lord about it. So in contrast, so we have Tamar here who is still in grieving clothes, Judah who is already out of them. So we kind of see the societal issues. There's a lot of injustices here that we can kind of sit on if we wanted to between the way the men in the society and the women in the society. And I'm sure there's plenty written on that if you wanted to look into it. Tamar has planned to deceive Judah. So he owes her. He really does. He's promised her provision, protection, and a child, and he's provided none of that. And so, again, in a certain sense, she's trying to take from him what she feels like he has unjustly removed from her, the protection, the provision, and the child. So in verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now." And he invites her in to and I'll send you a young goat from my flock as payment. So he's basically, saying, I know what kind of profession you're in. And she wasn't, obviously, but she did feel like he owed her something. So, and he said, I'll give you something right now that I have on my person, and then later on we'll trade. I'll send you a goat. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord and the staff in your hand. So those things would be very notable. A seal, a cord, or staff are all identifying markers. It would be like giving somebody your driver's license or something along those lines, a real identifier. And once he goes away, he'll send a goat with a servant and she'll give the driver's license back, kind of thing. That's kind of how we do it today. But she's going to hold his seal, his cord, and his staff. And so he gave them to her, and she gets pregnant by him. And after she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow clothes again. So this was a one-time thing. She's now carrying the child of Judah of the promised line. And this is where this child comes from. Now, again, not all the children of the promised line come from really great situations. We'll find even with King David, he has very kind of a questionable origin. Nobody's quite sure, but it may have been a little more questionable than his other brothers. That's why he wasn't invited as a normal son to that banquet with Samuel in the first place. So we see that here. Tamar and Judah, this is kind of an unusual situation. Usually, if a son died, the father wouldn't take the young lady as a wife. He would just give her to the other sons to have that child. So in verse 20, meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine woman that was sitting by the side of the road? And they said, there has been none of those types of women here. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hadn't been anybody there. And Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we'll be becoming a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. So the goat was probably much more expensive than what he'd given her, a walking stick and a couple identifiers. He's like, you know what? Let's not press it. Let's just, go get a new driver's license kind of idea in our day and age, right? When you trade somebody. It's like, I keep my money, or goat in this case, and she keeps my stuff. We don't even know who this person is. And if we try to go find her, It's just going to make us seem foolish in front of people, and people are going to find out what I did. And so again, Judah is not really like showing this upstanding character. His sons haven't either. Like things seem to not be going well. And this is going to be the line, the promised line. So we see a lot of human failings in these stories in Genesis. Like I said, Genesis doesn't disguise what's going on with people. It just tells us flat out, this is what they did. And we're not to read into it that somehow this was the way God wanted this story to come about. There had to have been a lot of other ways that this could have happened. Verse 24, about 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty, and she is now pregnant. So he knew she was not married. Bring her out and have her burned to death. So again, that's pretty serious. And we know Judah has done the exact same thing. And he goes, well, verse 25, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these. And she said, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. So she basically pulls out all this stuff and shows Judah. Judah recognizes them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son Shelah. And he did not touch Tamar again. Sorry. So that's where we're kind of at right now. Yeah, so Tamar again. So again, he was going to have her killed for the exact same sin he'd done. So we do see this injustice quite regularly between, even in Jesus' time, right? They're going to stone the woman for adultery, but there's no man there. So we see the injustice of that. So again, so she's caught pregnant, and so she basically has all of this stuff that can prove. So thankfully she didn't take the goat, right? The goat couldn't have proved anything. They would have eaten the goat or whatever. But here, this is very recognizable as his. And she knew what she was doing when she asked for these things. She needed proof. Basically, this is a DNA test of the past, right? She had something in her possession that she got. And the interesting thing here is Judah recognizes, he says, she's more righteous than I. Now, I'm not going to say this was righteousness. He owed her a son, but he owed her that through Shelah, not through himself. So there is some question on morality. I don't really know what to do with all of that, if what Tamar did was at all righteous, but it was more right than what he'd been doing to her. So again, in comparison, are either of them doing right? It's a little hard to know. I think we see a lot of precedents for someone's son dying and then she becoming the father's wife after that. Again, I'm not quite sure. So that's not really discussed. But Judah does understand that she had some rights to his family line. And she was just taking what was promised to her, having entered his family. That was what marriage meant. It was much larger than just marrying the person. She had a right to Shelah, and he had withheld that from her. And in this case, she actually becomes part of the lineage of the Davidic line because of this. So it had to be one of Judah's sons. Well, his first wife, we already know, is a Canaanite. His first two were evil, and we don't even know anything about the third son. But this son of hers basically replaces the son she should have had through her first husband, Judah's son. And so instead of his son being named in any further lineages, we basically see that now this is his son. This is his fourth son with Tamar, and it's going to be the one that comes into the promise. So I'm hoping I'm explaining that well. So in verse 27, when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys. She's having two. And she was giving birth. One of them put out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it to the wrist and said, this one came out first. But then he drew his hand back and his brother came out. And she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. So Perez is going to be the one here that carries the family line, the one that breaks forward. And so again, one twin sticks their hand out, and then the next twin is born, and then the one that had stuck its hand out gets born after that. So again, this whole idea of the younger and the older, and it not really following, knowing exactly which one was older or younger, is part of this story. But we do see this kind of as the culmination of what's going on here. So Judah doesn't have the standard promise line that we've seen with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He doesn't have those covenant moments where he talks to the Lord or builds an altar. because the covenant, once we hit Jacob, like I said, is going to go into all 12 of his sons. Just the promised kingly line is going to go to Judah. But the other 11 sons and tribes are still going to have a huge place in the history and as covenant people. So Abraham and now is going to be part of the covenant, right, with the sign of circumcision. Isaac then carries that on, not Ishmael. And then Jacob, not Esau. But we don't see that same thing happening where we just pick Judah and then we exclude all 11 other brothers. No, they all stay in this covenant promise. So we've gone from individuals carrying the covenant promise now to an entire tribal set of the 12 tribes carrying the covenant promise. So Judah is just one piece of that. And so we're not seeing the same interactions with him and God as the only one carrying the covenant and the start of the nation. We really did see that with Jacob, but we're not going to see that with Judah. There's no affirmations that we're finding here. Again, maybe he had some interactions with God, but they're not stated. We don't see the reaffirmation of offspring, promised land, and covenant agreements to just him. It's going to be to all 12 brothers. They're all going to inherit the land. And so things have started to change a little bit since Jacob has now the starter of this nation. The promised seed, however, will only go through the line of Judah. It can only go through one line, and that's how it's going to be. There will be a king, King Saul, who will be of the line of Benjamin, and obviously his reign was rather short, and his line didn't pick that up. Other people are going to have really important roles in the nation. Moses is from the tribe of Levi, and Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim or Joseph. And so we're going to see Moses and Joshua and some of these other major names throughout the Old Testament not be from the line of Judah, but they're all from the line of Jacob. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going to wrap up. We kind of want to have this idea of what was going on in general with Esau closing out his story, and also then the line of Judah and how his line was going to continue on, that it was kind of messy. Like I said, some of these stories in Genesis are really hard. This is probably one of those very difficult ones. Is what Tamar did right? Or was it not? And there's no commentary on that. That's not the point of the story. Again, the point of the narrative is to show what the line is, where it came from, and that it's legitimate. And that's pretty much it. It's not talking about how moral they were getting there. It probably wouldn't be high on our list of moral for Abraham to have been giving Sarah to harems multiple times, right? It's kind of the same thing here with Tamar. Is what she did absolutely right? It's a little hard to know. But at the same time, what Judah was doing was definitely not right. And so again, it's hard to tell. And there's not really any commentary in the New Testament on these things. Although sometimes it does put them in the Hall of Faith. And then we get an idea that, yes, these people were in the Hall of Faith and they were following God in a way that the people around them weren't. So that is usually the place that we can go to and look and see more about the story in the comments. Okay, so we're going to end there. And the next time we're going to start into the narratives of Joseph.